Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. I hope that you hear me well. I was asked to offer a few of my thoughts with regards to the motivations behind the ongoing war that Azerbaijan and especially Turkey have. I have already published a couple of articles and in a couple of interviews have reiterated what I'm going to offer now as my ongoing assessment, even though the situation obviously changes on the ground at a very fast pace. Some of my remarks will reiterate what Abraham Gasparyan was just sharing, but we'll be trying to look at the at those questions from a different angle, having my academic hat on top of this. Obviously, I would agree and with the prevalent opinion that we see in the media and in the expert community these days, that the ongoing war has largely been provoked by the lack of punishment, if you will, or lack of proper international reaction to the four-day war in April 2016. As you know, the April war of 2016 was followed by a couple of high-level meetings featuring the presidents of two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, with the OSCE Minsk Group co-chair countries at the level of the president of the Russian Federation and foreign ministers of all three countries, that's Russia, France, and the United States. However, there was no uniformity in condemning Azerbaijan for walking back on the commitments that Mr. Aliyev has shouldered at the Vienna meeting in May 2016, which basically featured, and this is just a reminder, which basically featured two main aspects, which, if implemented, would have prevented at least the scale of the war as it unfolds since September 27th. The first one was the expansion of the number of OSCE monitoring mission along the line of contact in Nagorno-Karabakh. And the second one, international incident investigation mechanisms on the line of contact to effectively end the blame game, if you will, between the parties with regards to every escalation on the front line that we have steadily been observing since 2011. So the lack of uniform international condemnation of Azerbaijan's destructive stance or lack of constructiveness in the peace process is one of the main reasons that has triggered this war, that has further played into the hands of Azerbaijan and Turkey this time to motivate them further for a larger scale war of aggression. And the second one, in my opinion, and Abraham spoke about this in a very nutshell, and obviously he knows more, having worked on the ground in Nagorno-Karabakh for more than 2 weeks since the beginning of the present war, about false parity in the media. What I have found in the past years, and this has been manifested even further these days, is these wrong perception or wrong definition, if you will, of neutrality or impartiality, not only in the media but also in the expert in the expert community, which is something that has been evolving around this excessive political correctness, not only in international organizations but also among the media and the expert community. I find that as a footnote in here, The Economist magazine has released a wonderful editorial in September 2016, the shortest ever essay in my memory to explain the origins of this problem. And obviously, this fake impartiality and neutrality, as in the media and same with the expert community, over years has created this sense of impunity in Azerbaijan and Turkey. Now, with this premise, I will make the main argument to open some sort of a discussion, or maybe to solicit some questions that you may have, which obviously I'll try to do my best to answer. My sense of the past 3 weeks of war and the strategy that Turkey, and to a lesser extent Azerbaijan, and I will explain this in a minute, are pursuing, is effectively to undermine the Moscow Treaty of 1921, which in 1921, that is 2 years before the establishment of the modern Republic of Turkey, and in the process of the emergence of the Soviet Union, the Soviet and leadership with Mustafa Kemal of Turkey have concluded a pact which effectively ended Turkish formal influence in the region of South Caucasus, which at the time has already been Sovietized. Now Turkey is with the pretty forceful and pretty open engagement with the war, is pursuing to undermine the Moscow Treaty and basically to push out Russia from the region of South Caucasus, and the regions of most active hostilities on the battlefield basically suggest this one as being the top strategic goal of Turkey. And the problem in here is that neither Azerbaijan, I should speak about political leaders, neither President Erdogan nor Aliyev have any problem with their reputations. They do not have the problem with looking bad, quote unquote. While you see that for the most part, the aggressiveness of various states in the international level has been predetermined significantly by the willingness of their governments and leaderships in particular to look good. They pretty much, any government you would pick, especially since 1990s, since the end of the Cold War, have been doing everything possible to look good. President Erdogan and Aliyev do not have this problem. If you look on the map, you'll see that Erdogan has not been shy of intervening into domestic affairs and waging open wars with pretty much majority, I would say, of Turkey's neighbors. The zero problems with neighbors has effectively transformed in the past 3 to 4 years into zero neighbors with problems. The elephant in the room in this context is Russia. Why? I mean, and we hear this from pretty much everywhere, be that the shores of the Atlantic or the other key countries in the world, the question of where is Russia in this context. Russian engagement so far has been only diplomatic. They were trying to persuade Azerbaijan and Turkey, Azerbaijan to a lesser extent Turkey, and Armenia, obviously its ally, to cease fire and to proceed to negotiations, which has not worked for a couple of reasons. The first one I already underlined, that Turkey's willingness to undermine the Moscow Treaty of 1921 and get a foothold in the South Caucasus. And for Azerbaijan, I am of the opinion that President Aliyev is, although he has done all in, speaking with poker terminology here for a second, he has done all in with regards to his political career and with regards to his political future, but I highly doubt that he is now the decision maker on the ground. Turkey, meanwhile, has made no secret from almost day one of the hostilities on the ground that it wants to engage in the South Caucasus. Turkey wants to engage with Russia with a deal, quote unquote, like in Idlib, Syria. And the deal in Idlib, Syria, is based on the premise that it will be Russia and Turkey determining the future of the region and Syria as a whole, to which Russia has pretty promptly responded that they do not see Turkey's interests as legitimate in the region of South Caucasus. Obviously, the legitimacy of interests of any of the players, be that in the region or outside of the region, will be determined by the progress on the battlefield, and pretty much the dynamics on the battlefield has been changing at any given point in the past 3 weeks. And last but not least, outside of the context of the strategic goals of Azerbaijan and Turkey, on which I will be happy to answer your questions. If I have 2 more minutes, I would like to briefly tackle the question of a UN Security Council.
Yes,
and
take your time.
And the 4 resolutions adopted on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in the UN Security Council between April to November 1993. Those that have been following the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and especially in the past 3 weeks, you would hear very, very often, almost in any interview by the president of Azerbaijan, this reference to the UN Security Council resolutions adopted in 1993, as if those resolutions claim Armenia has been an occupying power on the soil of Azerbaijan, etc., etc. Obviously, as it often happens, not many among the media, among the journalists covering this conflict, and what is more ironic, among the experts that are speaking publicly on this conflict, have ever really read these 4 resolutions. And Aliyev's persistence of portraying these resolutions under the light of his choosing has been gaining ground in the past decade or so. There are few considerations pertaining to these resolutions that I would like to invite your attention on, and obviously urge you to open those files and read those. And this is even more relevant given that as we speak now, the UN Security Council will be holding its 2nd session on Nagorno-Karabakh today to deliberate on the ongoing armed hostilities in Nagorno-Karabakh. The first demand that the UN Security Council resolutions were posing for the parties engaged in the conflict, and there were 3 parties explicitly named in the UN Security, in all of the 4 resolutions, including, by the way, 11 presidential statements adopted between 1992 and 94, presidential statements of the UN Security Council, acknowledged 3 parties to this conflict, be that Armenia, Azerbaijan, and quote unquote local Armenian forces. So the demand for all the parties on the ground, the first and foremost demand enshrined in the UN Charter, in the UN Security Council resolutions, was to demand the parties to cease armed hostilities. There were few military truces, same as Russia has been trying to negotiate and mediate between the parties on the 10th and 17th of October, both of which unfortunately collapsed. There were many local ceasefires and military truces on the battleground in 1993, and every time that the ceasefires were violated, Azerbaijan, those ceasefires were being violated because of another offensive by Azerbaijani armed forces. And every time Azerbaijan would lose new regions outside of the borders of the former Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, the UN Security Council would adopt new resolutions. The first one being, as I said, in April 1993, and then the last one being in November 1993, same year. One of the resolutions, that's the third one, number 874, calls on the parties to again cease hostilities, stop military clashes and resort to negotiating the peaceful settlement. It also urges it also acknowledges that the withdrawal of occupying troops and deblockade of borders and communication lines in and around Nagorno-Karabakh must be, I quote, reciprocal and urgent steps, meaning the claim that Azerbaijan has laid over years about the withdrawal of Armenian occupying forces outside of the borders of the former NKAO has been tied to the opening of the borders and opening communication lines, which obviously never happened. But the most important thing, which I hope will trigger and this is the last point I wanted to make, and the most important point pertaining to the conflict resolution and the role of the UN Security Council is that the UN Security Council resolutions only acknowledge the situations on the ground as it is from the point of membership of the relevant states in the UN. And I'll explain it with the example of the emergence of the latest member of the UN, South Sudan, in 2011. So the referendum on the final status of the region of South Sudan, of federal state of Sudan, was agreed upon in the comprehensive peace agreement signed in 2005. And then after some procrastination by the genocidal leader of South Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, who has 2 arrest warrants, by the way, in the International Criminal Court, there was a referendum scheduled and held for 2 weeks in late January and February, early February 2011. So between 2010, summer 2010 to summer 2011, there is a period when the referendum was already scheduled, and the moment when South Sudan became a full-scale member to the UN Security Council adopted 11 resolutions pertaining to Sudan. All the resolutions before the referendum and after the referendum, including after counting the votes, which you may presume that were predominantly pro-independence in February 2011, all the resolutions up until 48 hours before South Sudan's incorporation into the membership into the UN in July, I think 27th. All the UN Security Council resolutions recognize the territorial integrity of Sudan as it is from the point of Sudan's membership into the UN. And only after the admission of the new member, that is the South Sudan, the UN Security Council resolution started referring to the same territory as being composed of two countries, be that South Sudan and Sudan. Hopefully this would trigger more of your interest to do a little bit more research pertaining to one of the most controversial points in the conflict resolution in Nagorno-Karabakh. And with this, I'm going to mute myself in the expectations of questions, if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your words. I'm very interested in doing more research about it. And you mentioned also like articles like The Economist in 2016. And I guess you also have maybe articles to share or something, publications you wrote. So if you'd like to share them with us, maybe later this week, I would be very happy. There's one question.
I'll post those in the chat now.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So there's one long question just popped up in the chat. I'm going to read it out loud. It is in the interest of Moscow to reach a solution and a situation which will let Moscow keep control over the two countries. This is the strategy in the South Caucasus. But Azerbaijan is obviously working with Turkey, Azerbaijan, and tries to bring Turkey back to the South Caucasus, which is against the Russian interests. Azerbaijan violated the ceasefire mediated by Russia, which damages Moscow's prestige as a mediator. What do you think is the last line for Moscow, after which it will change its strategy of relative neutrality in the conflict?
I presume this is a question for me.
Yes, I think so.
I think I have, in the past 2 years, in the publicly available articles I have penned, I have been in one way or another predicting a war, an outbreak of hostilities in the border of larger scale than what we have witnessed in 2016. One thing that I couldn't predict is the scale of Turkey's involvement. And I think I have not yet seen any article or expert commentary to that effect yet. And that Turkey's involvement, I think, predetermines the involvement of Russia in one way or another. There are few things that I think Russia can or will do. One is the diplomatic involvement, which I think we have been observing since day one of the hostilities of the war. Actually, we have to give it the name as it is. It's a war. It's not hostility or crisis or escalation. We have seen Russian involvement diplomatically and politically since day one. But I think the scale of that involvement has not yet been of the necessary gravity to pressure Azerbaijan and Turkey, directly or indirectly, to return to negotiated settlement to the conflict. The big question, actually, I think the Nobel Prize question is, what is the red line for Russia? I have long been trying to understand this question, also pertaining to other conflicts that Russia is directly or indirectly involved. And my argument has always been, and remains so, that the concept of red line is practically absent from Russian literature, from Russian mentality. There is no understanding of red lines as you have or you see in American literature, for example, or the French literature. There is no concept of red lines. There is this saying prescribed, I think, to one of the Russian tsars that Russia concentrates slowly but acts fast. Probably the scale of the increasing scale of Turkey's involvement in the conflict will predetermine the scale of Russian involvement. What I see on the ground and politically, I think is that two things. One is that I believe Russia has voiced about its interest to deploy some military observers on the right shores of the Araxes River. That is the border between the crossroad actually between Iran, Azerbaijan, and Nagorno-Karabakh. Azerbaijan and Turkey have been not very welcoming of this, but I think we are going to witness this in one way or another. Second is that probably Russia is seeking more international legitimacy for more forceful, if you will, military involvement into this conflict. And there may be a variety of such sources of additional legitimacy for Russia. That can be UN Security Council that is meeting today, which I am not, I'm highly doubtful it will come from there. But I think Russian procrastination of larger scale involvement beyond political means was on top of some force of inertia, which is what great powers suffer very often. It has been the desire to get some international legitimacy for its, if you will, military involvement in the conflict. I do not think that the question of prestige is at stake there pertaining to Russia. I think in the coming 48 hours, I think we'll see some more Russian involvement. I think. Hopefully, I answered the question.
Thank you very much. Is there another question?
May I have a follow-up question?
I'm sorry?
I have a follow-up question from Mr. Nikoghosyan regarding this international legitimacy. As you mentioned, and as we see that the other great powers, it seems they recognize Russia's role that in this conflict somehow unique, and in this case, I hardly understand why Russia indeed needs this international legitimacy to infer to conflict more, to use hard tools for it.
Well, that's my assessment. I think the number of different issues that Russia is involved in the past decade or so, let's count since the August war in Georgia, 2008. I think Russia kind of has learned its lessons of international backlash. There is the sanctions regime. There are all sorts of questions that Russia is dealing with now, and I think Russia needs somewhat more beyond the recognition of its exclusive zone of influence in the South Caucasus from other great powers to really intervene beyond political measures. That's my reading of the situation. I may be wrong, but that's my reading.
Thank you very much. There is one more question from one of our media trainers, Minoas. I'd like to read it out. Actually, there are two. So the first one, the narrative of the Azerbaijan government is that they fight a war of defense against Armenia because, as they say, they just responded to an Armenian attack. Correct me if I'm wrong. How would you argue against that narrative?
And there is, I think, a second question, right?
Yeah, I can read it out loud now too. Are there any voices in Azerbaijan, media or political organizations that oppose the war?
I think the second one is the, thank you for two very good questions. I'll be trying to be as brief as possible. I'll start with the second one. I think the opposition voices, well, let me do a footnote here before I begin. Internet has been significantly slowed down, and some social networks shut down in Azerbaijan from the night of September 26th. There are many publications, to this end. YouTube, Facebook, WhatsApp, and other services have been completely shut down. Someone I know in Baku has posted a screenshot of updating his the OS on his MacBook, and it showed that the speed of internet requires 2 weeks for the download of 1 GB of a file. So significant slowdown of the internet, which means that all the voices we see, in my assessment, all the voices we see from Azerbaijan are either typed in government offices or in special troll factories that are collaborating or are under the direct command of the government. The opposition voices. There have been many more or less prominent opposition figures in Azerbaijan, be that Khatija Ismailova, Ilgar Mammadov, and others, who I think I have always argued that, openly argued that those are even more xenophobic than, on Armenian-related matters, those are even more xenophobic than those in the political elite of Azerbaijan. Because anti-Armenian rhetoric has always been part of domestic political discourse in Azerbaijan, completely disregarded by international community, and now we see the echoes of that policy. So the names that I have just given, if you go on Twitter and follow these personalities, you will see the amount of hatred and xenophobia that they have, that they are projecting and broadcasting against Armenians. So one thing that I think has to be concluded on the present war is that all the peace building efforts funded either by the United States or by the European Union have just collapsed. After the war, there will not be anyone on the Azerbaijani side that such peace building efforts can be built upon. Basically, I think the war demonstrates that all the efforts, all the millions of euros and dollars spent on this have been just in vain. Which there were many voices actually speaking about this and predicting this kind of an outcome, but to no avail. The first question, with regards to Azerbaijan's government narrative, obviously I'm aware of that narrative, but I think I mean the other day on Al Jazeera, when the other interviewee from Azerbaijan was making this claim, I mean, I said what I'm going to repeat now. I mean, you cannot argue for long about the color of milk, right? Milk is white. There are things that are evidenced beyond any reasonable doubt. That Azerbaijan has been planning this war of aggression probably since 2016, which I kind of spoke about in the beginning of my talk. Since 2016, the 4-day war, they kind of saw the impunity and they followed it up. And obviously, Turkey's involvement has facilitated this scale of this aggression, war of aggression. I think there are a bunch of irrefutable evidences that warrant the conclusion that this is a war of aggression by Azerbaijan, supported by Turkey, and maybe thousands of mercenaries from Libya and Syria that are fighting against Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh and also targeting the territory of Armenia, mainland Armenia. The argument by Azerbaijan about belated armed attack has been kind of massaged since 2009, when they started, bringing this up in the UN. Even hired some prominent lawyers to build up this argument. But I think, to more or less reasonable, experts, and sure for pretty much every government in the world, it's kind of clear that it's Azerbaijan that has started the war. It's a different question about, this political correctness or other questions that some governments are avoiding. Naming and shaming. Although we see some, signs of hope of sanity in countries like France or Germany, which, as well as Russia, by the way, some sort of also United States, directly addressing the aggressor in this war, and which we must hope that will also be followed up by more concrete action. So I think this narrative, it doesn't make a lot of sense to discuss this narrative because it's just propaganda. Turkey has been denying the Armenian genocide for 105 years. It takes nothing to obviously deny the scale of the war. I hope I answered your questions.
There is one last question, very interesting question from the audience. I'm going to read out loud. What are the mistakes of Armenians in this conflict, if you think there is any? And do you think that Russian relations have only positive diplomatic backgrounds and that they are not manipulating and using this conflict in their favor?
Well, I think this is a very good question, and obviously many of us think of the lessons that this war will offer. One of the primary lessons, and I'm having this trouble, by the way, in my own classrooms in the American University, having hard time to explain the relevance of liberal theories of international relations to my students. I think one of the main mistakes that we have long presumed is that what we have believed in since 2008 is that stability in our neighborhood is more important than alliances outside of this region. And the behavior that we are witnessing from Georgia is well, pretty deplorable. Let me use this word as an irresponsible academic person. So one mistake is that relying on some countries that we used to think that can be relied upon turned out to be a dramatic mistake. With regards to Russia, and I think there is this word manipulating the conflict in its favor. I think not being a state official or anyhow affiliated with the government, I think I have the liberty of kind of arguing or concluding that all the countries have their national interests, and all the countries follow their national interests. It is upon their allies to draw conclusions of their behavior. I think the procrastination of more forceful involvement by Russia, as well as other countries such as Germany, France, the United States, and a couple of other countries that we have traditionally had strategic level of partnerships and relations, is manifesting a number of lessons that will be drawn at a later stage. Do I believe that Russia has its own national interest? Of course I do. Do I believe that Russia is manipulating anything in here? I do not think so, because it's against the Russian interest to lose the South Caucasus. But obviously, I'm not in the position of explaining the Russian national interest to the Russians. I think there are enough smart people to there to understand their own national interests. It's just upon us to draw our own lessons. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much for your answer and also for your question, Mariam.